Welcome to the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. Today's episode's a bit different. This is called The Business. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you've come here for interviews on subjects about lawn care, garden care from Australian experts, well, this isn't the episode for you. However, if you are a small business owner, or you are someone who's looking to start a business in the industry, or you're looking to expand, all that sort of stuff, this is exactly what this is about. I want to make a helpful podcast where we have episodes where sometimes we talk to experts, sometimes I just waffle on and talk about rubbish. And so anyways, that's what this is about. We're going to talk about the things that are needed to run a successful business, including marketing, pricing, how to hire people, running small teams, how to price big jobs, small jobs, things like that, everything, equipment, all that sort of stuff. That's what these episodes are going to be about. So if you're looking for expert advice, or stories from great people in our industry, it's not really what this episode is about. You're free to leave. We love you. Maybe this is just not an episode for you, and that's totally fine. But if you're a small business owner, I hope this is a really helpful resource. And we're going to be doing a bunch of them. This is episode number 1. Now, we're talking today about hourly rates. What should a gardener charge per hour in Australia? This is for lawn maintenance. This can work for a lot of different niches of the industry. We're going to actually go through some numbers. Now, if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this, there is a YouTube video. And I'm going to be screen sharing and actually running through a spreadsheet, which I'll give you the ability to download as well. But we're going to run through a spreadsheet and we're going to talk about the real world numbers of a specific business in New South Wales. So we actually have been given some real world expenses for this year, or this current financial year. I'm currently in April. So we've been given some real world numbers for that. And we're going to use those real world numbers to show what people should be charging or what this business should be charging. Now, this will show you how to put your numbers in and work it out for yourself. But there's a lot of bad advice online, and I haven't seen a video as in-depth as this online. And so that's what this is entirely about. Now, some of you would have seen the content that I've put out before on some Facebook groups and things like that. And this is going to be a lot in that line. And a lot of people have found that content really helpful. But this is going to be some of the most in-depth stuff that I've ever done before. So you got to brace yourself and you got to buckle in. But one of the things I don't want you to do is I don't want you to feel like you're a bit of an idiot. And I've seen this a lot in the industry. If you've been running a business, I don't care if it's a cleaning business, I don't care if it's a gardening business, whatever. Stop thinking lowly of yourself as if you are some pleb of society and that's all you can do because, gardening is for low life people or whatever. Now, some people think that is wrong. You don't need to be a genius to understand this stuff. You do need to think. Some of this stuff isn't, easily accessible. It's why we don't understand it so well. But you're not an idiot, and I don't want you to feel like you're an idiot. And you will be able to understand these concepts. Some of you will understand them better if you're actually watching the YouTube. Some of you will get it straight away just by listening to this podcast. But I don't want anyone to feel like they need a university degree or some TAFE course to validate their intelligence. If you've been running a business in this industry, you need to give yourself a little bit more credit because that is a very difficult thing to do. Most businesses fail. If you've been around for a couple of years, you're actually doing really well. And so don't shut your mind off and think, this is too complicated for me to ever understand. I was just a gardener. I'm just a gardener, really. I don't have any university degree. All I've done is I've run a business for 10 years and I've made every single mistake under the sun. And what we're going to talk about is not some crazy difficult accounting principles. It's just a gardener, that's me, talking to you about what to charge. And hopefully this is helpful and hopefully I can get some stuff. Now, let's get cracking into some bad advice that I've seen online. All right, if you can see this on the screen, what I've done is I'm going to look at some of the stuff that you see when you Google what should a gardener charge in Australia per hour. It is rubbish. The first result I get, maybe slightly different for you, but it's a Yellow Pages article, and it says, the title of the article is, How Much Does Hiring a Gardener Cost in 2023? And the number they've given is between $40 and $60 per hour. That is rubbish. If you are charging that, there's some what's the word I'm looking for? There's some people who don't fit into this. What do you call outliers? But most people, if you're charging that, you're not going to last very long because you just are not going to make much profit off this. Now, we're going to go through numbers soon, but let's look at this bad advice. I'm scrolling down the screen for those who are just listening. The next article is bricksplusagent.com. How much does a hiring a gardener cost in Australia? And the answer is the average gardener hourly rates in Australia are around $45 per hour. No, they're not. We have data to show that. We'll talk about it soon. You can also find previous services for as much as $50 per hour. My goodness, that is rubbish. Service seeking. How much does it cost to hire a gardener? The cost to hire a gardener in Australia ranges from $30 an hour to $80 an hour, right? The average cost they're saying is $45 an hour. Look, okay, we're getting a little bit higher, but that's still rubbish, right? If the average is $45 an hour, now $80 an hour, we may be able to make that work for some people. Maybe. We'll talk about the numbers soon. High pages. How much do gardeners cost? 2023, and they've said $60 to $80 per hour. Higher trades. They've said between $40 and $60 per hour. Look, air tasker, $40 to $60 an hour. Now, it has had a few things where they said $50 to $220 per hour. Look, I like that number. But look, you get the idea. I'm scrolling down, we're seeing $50 an hour, $50 to $70 an hour, all that sort of stuff. Look, if you're one of these people who have bought into a new franchise or you are brand new into the industry, that's the information you've got to go off. And so this is going to be super important for you. Don't believe that information, basically. We're going to, I keep saying this, we're going to look into the numbers, but it is not true that gardeners charge between $40 and $60 per hour. I'm going to show you that in just a second. But I want to say, these pages, the reason why they come up with these numbers, they're yellow pages, they're high pages, service seeking, high trades, air tasker. What these are, what do you call them? They're lead generation websites. Now, most of the people who need lead generation websites are people who start out in business. And if you start out in business, you don't have a lot of work, it's great to use one of these services to go and get somebody, get some work if you're just starting out. So they're using numbers often of what people have said they are charging on their platform. And the problem with that is that the people who are charging on that platform are brand new to the industry and they don't know what they're doing. And so all these numbers are based off, in my belief, earlier businesses who are not confident, who haven't done their accounting, and who don't know what they're doing. When I started my business 10 years ago, my first job I ever did was $35 an hour. I think I did about 2 or 3 jobs at $35 an hour before I realized that that was nothing. Now, I was earning, at the time, I was a head groundskeeper at a school, and I was earning, I think, $23-ish an hour. So I thought $35 an hour was killing it. And then I realized I was earning less money, way less money, because I was taking my fuel costs and all that sort of stuff. But that's what it is. That's what the reality is. Even though I'm not charging that today, a lot of people start out, they start cheap and then they work their way up, maybe a year in, 6 months in, 3 months in, 2 years in, 5 years in. You work out, look, you've slowly increased it and you finally get to a rate that you're actually proud of. And by that time, you're probably not using these service-seeking pages or these lead generation pages anymore. And so that's why the data on these websites is really inaccurate. Real-world businesses that have been running for a long time are not charging these rates, unless there's some outliers and they can be successful, but we're going to talk about them soon. But let's look into, what do gardeners actually charge in 2023? Because I did a little bit of a study. Let me check this on the screen. There's a Facebook group called Lawn Mowing Contractors Australia. Now, I'm just going to briefly zoom in here. These are just my posts. Okay, so hopefully there's nothing being, shared. That's nobody want to share on this platform. But a year ago, this is a post I posted out. A year ago, I asked this exact question. We had 347 votes. It would be so cool to see if anything has changed in the last 12 months. And that question is, if you were to drive to a job and be there for 1 hour, what do you need to charge so that your business is enjoyable and that you're making good profits? Okay, so this is a 1 hour job, including your travel time, as in like your travel time is on top of that. But you've got to think about your travel time and all that sort of stuff. We had, I think it's at the bottom, I think we had 657 votes. If you're watching, you can see that 60 comments. A lot of funny jokes, things like that. But what were the numbers? I'm going to go through numbers. If you're listening to this, you're going to get, I'll explain it slowly to you. But out of the 600, I've given options for everybody. I should explain this a little bit better. Sorry, I might be going a little bit quick. But every year, I've put up a Facebook post at the beginning of the year. This is January 2nd, 2023. Did it in 2022 as well. At the beginning of the year, I put up a post saying, what do people charge? There are 5,000 contractors at the moment, or more than that, on this page, lawn mowing contractors in Australia. And we have 600 plus different businesses that have voted. And so this wouldn't be what you would call a scientific study because we haven't accounted for variables like people making jokes, or, we haven't maybe got a perfectly good average, but this is going to be a way better average than anything that you're going to get on those service seeking pages, because these are from a wider range of businesses across the country, not just people using those service seeking sites. And also, I do think some of those service seeking sites are just sharing each other's information, if you get what I mean. Like somebody just, I've got to write an article. So they Google it and they see somebody else has said on Google $50 an hour. So they put in $50 an hour. And it looks like 10 people have come up to that conclusion on their own, but probably 5 of them copied each other. Anyways, so I've put in there, for those listening, a bunch of options. I charge $0 to $50 an hour, $50 to $60 an hour, $60 to $70 an hour, 70, 80. You get the idea. Here what the votes are. 600 and what was it again? 657 votes. $0 to $50 an hour. 1% of people. 1% of people said they charge $0 to $50 an hour. We get on this other website over here. What was it? I'm just changing the page. Where's the... Okay. Bricks and Agent, the second response on Google says the average rate is $45 an hour. That's not true. 1% of people are charging $45 an hour or around there, right, on this little work we did. Okay, I charge $50 to $60 an hour, or $60 for 1 hour of work. 8% of people charge that. I charge $60 to $70 an hour is 13%. $70 to $80 an hour, this is the biggest category, is 30%. $80 to $90 an hour is 12%. $90 to $100 an hour, or for 1 hour, is 9%. 110 to 100, so 100 to 110 is 15%. That's another big category. So that's quite interesting that there's a lot of people at 70 to 80. There's a little bit of a bigger hump at 100 to 110. And then it really dips off after that. 4% charge 110 to 120 and 3% charge 120 to 130. And then you get a few people who charge a little bit more. And then, you've got some jokes, which I like the jokes. So no problem there. You'll see I've ticked, I charge $120 to $130 for 1 hour of work at Silverstone Gardening. Look, we'll just put it out there. For 1 hour of work, our business charges $127. That is our minimum charge. Now, that doesn't mean that's what you should be charging, because every business is different. We have a lot of expenses, and that's why we're right at the top. And also, we aim for high-end work. So it's a little bit different there, but that's what we're charging. We've been around for 10 years. That's what we've worked out. If we're going to add products and things like that to it, it's going to be more. But you get the idea. The biggest group of people in Australia are charging, 30% of people who answered this at least, are charging $70 to $80 an hour. And I would say the second biggest clump is $90 to $100 and $100 to $110. So around that $100 an hour is probably at 25% of the industry. And you would say about 40% of the industry is sort of around the $80 mark. I put all this data into a spreadsheet, and the results were actually that we got $78 an hour as the average from this. So that is a much more accurate real world average for what gardening companies actually charge. Hey everyone, just a quick interjection into this podcast. I realized I should have said this in the podcast, so I'm putting it in now. This is not a paid ad, but if you are going through this and your mind's being opened up a little bit and you find this really helpful, but you don't work with an accountant, this is the sort of stuff a really good accountant will help you with. Another great option for you would be actually to work with a business coach. I'm going to put the details of Darren, who is my business coach, down in the description of this YouTube video. And he might be a great option for you guys. Again, he's not paying for this, and I'm not advertising any specific accountant, but I'm just going to put it out there that the money you spend with these good conversations with accountants and business coaches and people like that will return its weight in gold if you apply the great advice. And I think small business is a really lonely place sometimes. And so having somebody who's being able to hear what you're going through, help you come to a great plan alongside of you, that can be the difference between success and failure sometimes. So I'll chuck some details below. Don't be afraid to get a great relationship with an accountant. And let's get back into the podcast. All right, we're back. We've just looked into what people are saying online. We've looked into some different opinions of what people are actually charging in the real world, aggregated that data. But one of the traps that people fall into, and I don't want you to do this, is just to simply copy what somebody else is doing and go, well, that will work for me, because that might not be the same. They might have the same sort of expenses. They might not have the same type of equipment. Their route density or their scheduling efficiency just might be completely different. And so this spreadsheet that we've got here, I've got in front of me now. And for those listening, I'm going to do my best to explain it so that you understand these concepts just in audio form. But this spreadsheet will actually show you a really good projection. And I need to use that term projection. This is not going to be the exact number, but it's a really good number for what you should be charging. Treat this as something that is going to, I guess, narrow down the range of prices that you should be charging. If you want exact numbers, this really needs to be something that you work with regularly with an accountant. But this will show you a great ballpark, excuse me, a much more accurate ballpark than anything you're going to get just from people telling you online. And so we had a guy, Brett from New South Wales. He's actually sent through his own personal data for his business for this year. So we're going to put in some real world numbers that are going to be really helpful if you've been running a business in Australia. Brett from New South Wales, he's sent through some stuff. And so we're going to go through that and we're going to work out his numbers, what he should be charging. And he's actually told me what his income is as well so far for this year. So we can compare at the end how he's actually tracking as a small business, which is really cool. So the first thing you need to know, well, there's a few things you need to know. Let me tell you what you need to know. Describe it as accurately as possible. You need to know, before you start this, you need to know how many weeks you're going to work in a year, right? Don't write 52, right? The more weeks you work, the lower your hourly rate is going to be, because you're going to have expenses. Let's say you have $100,000 of expenses and you're only going to work 100 hours. Then you need to charge $1,000 an hour just to cover your expenses. But if you have $100,000 of expenses and you have a team that works 100,000 hours a year because you've got that many people, well, then you only have $1 an hour of expenses. So you need to know how many weeks you're going to work per year. If you're planning to take off a massive chunk of time to, go camping or go to Bali and I don't know, whatever you want to do, if you've got plans for the year, you need to think about this. Now, Brett, I've already put this in. He has had 4 weeks off annual leave this year. Doesn't sound like he's going to have any more. So he's going to work 48 weeks this year. I think that's really good as well. By the way, I think the first 3-4 years of me running my business, I think I only had 1 week off around Christmas each year. Not a great idea. The next thing you need to know is how many gardening hours, billable hours, you're going to do per week. All right, actually, I should write that down. Gardening hours per week. Now, these are hours that you actually charge for. Now, Brett sent through that he's doing in October to April 50 to 55 hours a week. So he's roughly working 10, 11-hour days. And in winter, which he's called May to September, he's working 30 to 40 hours a week. So I've put down as an average, and he's actually doing about 42 hours a week. But I clarified that a little bit because that includes some of his non-billable hours. And he's told me he's doing about 1 hour a day of non-billables. Now, non-billables are the thing that everyone gets stuffed up on. This is the thing that no one takes into account. Let's take this. We'll talk about this in a minute. But his gardening hours a week, he's doing about, it was about 42 hours a week on average. He is on the road, right? And he's out there doing the gardening, but about 1 hour a day, so 5 hours a week is non-billable. So he's charging 37 hours a week of gardening. Now, this spreadsheet has automatically worked out that 37 hours a week times 48 weeks of the year is 1,776 hours a year. That's how many hours he has to cover his expenses. Now, non-billable hours. This is where people get stuffed up. Now, we already know it's 5 hours a week for Brett, so we're putting in 5. I'm not including admin hours in this yet. Actually, I should. He told me he's doing half an hour a day of administration. That's 2.5 hours a week. This is where people get absolutely stuffed up, because when you go out and you think about charging a job, you only think about the time you are on site. You don't think about all these non-billables. If you're somebody who's never hired somebody, of course you would think that way. I thought that way. But the problem is as soon as you hire somebody, you need to pay them for all these non-billable hours. So non-billable meaning you cannot charge the client for it, or you don't charge the client for it, not directly at least. So when you're driving to Bunnings to pick up some whippy cord, I wouldn't usually recommend getting it from Bunnings, but whatever. You're driving to the mower shop to get some stuff. You're driving to the tip, right? If you had an employee, you would have to pay them. But our, small business owners, we don't think of that as work time, but that is work time. If you're working for somebody else, you'll get paid for it. So are you getting paid for that when you work for yourself? Well, you should be. And so a lot of people, they don't take into account their actual non-billable hours, and they do a job. They do like a 15-minute job, and they charge, let's say $50 for it. And they think, oh, cool. Well, that's $200 an hour. Fantastic. Yeah, but if it took you 45 minutes to drive there, it's only $100 an hour because you're 45 minutes. So $50 an hour. Your $50 job that you did in 15 minutes plus the 45 minutes worth of travel time, the job really took you an hour, even though you were only on site for 15 minutes. And so this is a thing that kills a lot of businesses, is they only think about the time they're on site. They're not talking about their non-billables. Now, Brett in New South Wales, he's actually got a really good ratio of gardening hours worked to non-billables. So he's telling me that a lot of his jobs are really quite tight and efficient. I don't know how many years he's been in business. It usually does take some time to build up a tight, efficient schedule where your jobs are really close together. But him only doing 1 hour a day of travel time in about, on average, and sort of a 8-ish, 9-ish hour long day, that's really good. I know of people who are doing 2, maybe more hours a day of travel time because they've got a couple of jobs close together, and then they drive 30 minutes out to somewhere else, do a couple of jobs close together, and they drive another 30 minutes to somewhere else. And so it really blows out over time. And so we've taken into account our non-billable hours. If you're seeing this on YouTube, you can see this, but Brett's total billable hours per year is 1,776 hours a year, and his non-billable hours is 125. So he needs to cover his costs. He needs to cover his non-billable hour costs whilst he's charging for the actual work. I hope that makes sense. People usually do this in sort of a call-out fee. At Silverstone Gardening, we work this into our hourly rate. That's why our 1 hour hourly rate is $127, which I said before, because we've actually taken into account all of our non-billable hours. It gets cheaper each hour we do because we don't need to take into account as much travel time, all that sort of stuff. I hope that makes sense to you. Like, you don't need to charge, and it is more helpful to charge or think about charging a call-out fee with your hourly rate to cover these non-billable expenses. So the next thing, let's recap a little bit before we go on to the next thing. Actually, we've worked 48 weeks per year. We're doing 37 gardening hours per week where we can actually charge for work. And we're doing 5 hours a week of non-billable gardening hours, and we're doing 2.5 hours a week of admin work, so half an hour a day. And so Brett from New South Wales, he's working roughly 45 hours a week, and I think that's a really good reflection of what a lot of businesses are doing. It's probably slightly on the higher side, but certainly not unheard of. And so should be a pretty good reflection for what perhaps you should be charging. Obviously, do your own numbers. Now, replacement gardener wage. This is what's really important to know. The first thing that people get wrong is they don't account for non-billable hours. The second thing they get wrong is they have no idea what they should be paying themselves, right? Because you just go, what do you want to get paid? Well, I want to get paid $100,000 a year. I want to get paid $60,000 a year. Is that actually what you're worth? And this is what people struggle with. And is a great way to actually work it out. And this spreadsheet will do it for you. What would it cost you if you're a solo operator? What would it cost you to replace yourself for your gardening hours and for your admin hours? Now, there are some small business owner things you do which are very high hourly rate work, right? And so this is things like creating plans and projections and things like that. I'm not talking about those sort of things. I'm literally talking about just the gardening work. If you had to hire somebody to work at your work rate out in the field, mowing lawns, trimming hedges, planting plants, right? How much would it cost? And a lot of people, they get stumped a little bit. So you might need to take some time if you haven't got experience with hiring people or you haven't worked in the industry for too long. You may need to do a little bit of research. But I had a chat with Brett, and Brett was talking, and I think he's really on the like hitting the nail on the head. I said, what would it cost for you to hire somebody? And he said, to be honest, I don't know, which is what a lot of people would say. But he started talking. I'm not going to read out everything, but he said, I don't know if I could find someone who would work like I do with 10-hour days with no breaks, right? And that is a big issue. And this is where a lot of people get stuck because they think, well, the gardening award rate is $25 an hour or whatever it is. I think the casual rate is it's just under 26. I think, don't quote me on that, but it's in that ballpark. And so they think, well, the award rate is 25. Maybe I could pay someone casual $30, right? But would somebody really work as hard as you? So look, I'm going to put down for Brett $40 an hour, considering how much work he's doing each day, what he's going to need to pay somebody to be able to do that at his rate of efficiency. Now, you could pay someone $30 an hour. Maybe they're a little bit slower. So that actually costs you roughly the same as the $40 an hour person because the $40 an hour person does it in less hours and the $30 an hour person does it in more hours. So the total cost is roughly the same. So I think for him, $40 an hour, and this is as a wage, we're going to add in super workers' compensation later. And I've had this as a casual wage too, right? So there's casual loading put on top of that. And so you use a casual wage in this. So $40 an hour as a casual wage is what we've put down for Brett's replacement gardener if he was to replace himself. And then replacement admin wage, that's a lot more easy to find, to be honest. If you had a work from home administrator who was covering for some of your phone calls, emails, things like that, I think you could get a casual for maybe $27 an hour, something like that. There's a lot of mums who would love to work from home and, $27 an hour, $30 an hour, maybe $25 an hour for some. Look, it's in that ballpark. And I don't think it's that important to get that number exact because obviously the majority of what you do is gardening. And so if you get that number wrong, it's going to skew it a lot. If you're not doing that much admin, a couple of dollars here or there is not going to stuff this number up too much. So let's recap for those listening. We've worked out how many weeks we're working a year, and then we worked out how many gardening hours we're doing per week. These are billable hours we're charging for, right? And we're doing 37 paid hours a week over 48 weeks a year. That's 1,776 paid hours per year. Then we've gone to our non-billables, and we're doing 5 non-billable hours a week worth of gardening work and 2.5 non-billable hours a week worth of admin work. So emails, chasing up invoices, things like that. And so we have our total non-billable hours of year, 125 non-billable hours per year. And so we take those numbers together and we can work out that at $40 an hour, with the hours being worked our yearly gardener costs, including super and workers' compensation. This is another trap that people fall into. They just chuck in their hourly rate and they don't realize that they need to pay 10% more for super and roughly 5% more for workers' comp. It depends on what industry you're in. So this spreadsheet's working out at 5%. But if you're doing a lot more tree lopping, it's going to be more for you and working at height and all that sort of stuff. But 5% is a good average. So for Brett, the cost of him to replace himself in the field as a gardener is going to be $92,000 per year, right? It's probably going to work out to about, I would say, roughly $80,000 a year, a little bit less in actual wages, and then the super and workers' comp is the rest. But you're getting the idea. So $92,000 a year is what Brett is worth as an employee, right? Just for the gardening. And then it's going to cost him about $3,700 a year for administration. So Brett, as an employee in his business, and we're not talking profit here, we're just talking wages. If he was to replace himself, he would roughly be worth $96,000, $97,000 a year. That's how much he would have to pay employees to pay themselves. And this is what blows people's minds because they think, I made $60,000 of what they call profit. Now, it's not profit. We're going to talk about that. But if you're working for yourself, every single dollar that you take into your account is not called profit. Okay, that's not accurate whatsoever. Now, the problem that we see here is that people, they go and they think, oh, look, I'm making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. I've got a healthy business. They haven't taken into account their non-billable hours. They haven't taken into account their admin hours. They're not taking into account super and workers' comp. And then they go and hire somebody and they're not making money. And they realize that the $30 an hour employee that they're hiring or the $40 an hour employee, whatever it is making more money than they ever were. And that's why they're losing money. So this is why this is really important. Now, you can imagine what this is going to cost per hour. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can actually see on the right-hand side, there already are some numbers because I've entered in some stuff already to make this a little bit quicker. But I'm going to go explain this to the people listening on the podcast. The yearly gardener cost for Brett in his business, considering the week he works and all sorts of stuff, as a casual rate is $92,000 a year. It's about $97,000, $96,000 a year if he's got admin costs. So what we've done is we got his running costs now. So we've taken that $97,000 of wage expense and we need to add in, well, how many hours, or so how many expenses have we got to actually run the business? So equipment, vehicles, insurance, fuel, things like that, advertising, other expenses. Now, Brett has sent me through some numbers. I've tweaked them a little bit because he sent them to year to date. And I've gone a little bit higher than what he said, just in case something goes wrong, okay, for him. Now, what we've got is for the year to date, Brett's equipment, vehicle, repairs, things like that, they're going to cost him about $13,251 per year. His projected fuel cost based on what he's already spent this year is going to be about $7,716 for the year. His insurance is costing him about $4,400 per year. His advertising and other expenses he's put down as zero, which is totally fine, but you would find that most people are going to be spending some money on advertising and they are going to have other expenses like software and things like that. Now, I've gone on the higher end for these other things as well, so I'm perfectly comfortable with having his total running cost for the year be $25,417. But if you're doing this at home, work this out as accurately as you can. Other expenses might be things like accounting expenses, software, things like that. Like if you're paying for like a scheduling software or you've got, other things, you get what I mean. But usually those things are not too expensive. So I guess $25,000 a year is a pretty good ballpark. So what we do is we take the wages that he should be paying if he was to replace himself. We take our running costs and we have a total running costs and wages. Speak clearly, Luke. Total running costs and wages of $121,000 a year. Now, what that means is if all Brett does for the year is $121,000 worth of work, he's not really what I would call profitable. He's making money, So he's making what I would call owner's drawings. And I think a lot of accountants would call it this as well. I'm not an accountant, so I'm not going to say for sure. But a lot of accountants would call this owner's drawings. This is really the wages you make. And if you were to replace yourself and he was earning $121,000 a year, he would break even for the year. He wouldn't make a single cent. Now, what does that mean for hourly rate? Well, and also I should say with 120,000, we haven't added profit, like I just said, but we also haven't added GST. He's got to do $121,000 in 1,776 hours worth of billable time. I hope that's making sense now. So over the year, he's working 48 weeks. He's doing 37 hours of billable time. And at a minimum, he has to charge $121,000 a year to cover his running costs and his yearly wage estimations, right? And so if you just simply divide $121,000 by 1,700 hours, then you get a break-even rate of $68 an hour and 63 cents. And so Brett's break-even rate is $68 an hour. He is not making any profit. Now, if he was charging $68 an hour, well, he wouldn't have a terrible business, right? It wouldn't be rubbish at all. Now, this is $68 per hour plus GST. So really that's what, $75 an hour in that ballpark. So if he's charging $68 an hour plus GST, he's doing okay. But he's not really making a profit. And so what we've done here on the spreadsheet is we don't just take into account the running costs and the admin costs and the gardening costs. We take into account profit as well. And I've put profit percent as 20%. I think it's a great target for business to have. If you have a 10% profit margin, well, you don't have a lot of wiggle room for things to go wrong. If you then have a 30% profit margin, you can definitely do that and aim for the sky, challenge yourself, see how far you can take it. But a 30% profit margin often might put you a little bit beyond where you are comfortable pricing wise. But hey, do what you can. So 20% profit margin for Brett. He should be charging $24,000 a year for profit. Now, if you think about profit, right, a lot of people get stuck on this. And I've heard people with a lot of experience in the industry say, oh, I'm not so sure about profit. Like, should I be charging for profit? Right? Yes, 100% you should be charging for profit. The reality is you are taking on so much risk as a business owner. You are taking on so much stress in chasing up payments. You are not going to be guaranteed that every single one of your clients will pay. Hopefully, every single one of your clients pay, but you're not guaranteed that. There's a risk there. There's a risk that you go and buy a secondhand lawnmower for $10,000 and then in 6 months it breaks down on you. There are so many risks that you take on as a small business owner that employees don't take on. So why would you only pay yourself the equivalent of an employee? Why would you take on all that risk and not actually counter in some profit? That's one of the things that you can see these sort of 3 levels of things that people don't add on, which cause them to have very low hourly rates and ultimately causes burnout and unsuccessful businesses and all these challenges that happen. And this is what makes the industry such a tough place to be in. People don't consider the non-billable hours. They don't consider the yearly or their replacement cost as an employee. They're just pulling numbers from the sky and they're not adding in profit. And so what that means is you get 2 years in, 6 months in, whatever it is, and you realize I'm not making any money. And so either you leave, you get burnt out, you keep working more and more and more hours because you think that's the problem. I'm just not got enough work. But the problem is your hourly rate's wrong. And that's why so many people don't last very long in this industry. And so we've added a 20% profit margin for Brett in this business, which is $24,000 per year. And we've also added on top of that, then the GST, which you have to charge. So what does that mean? Well, that means that Brett's target sales for the year to have a business with a 20% profit margin would be $159,000 a year. That would cover the $97,000 roughly that's costing to replace himself as an employee, which he should pay himself as owner's drawings. The $25,000 a year it costs him to run the business. The $24,000 a year in profit. So Brett should be charging about $159,000 worth of work over the year to have a business that has a 20% profit margin, covers its GST, pays himself a fair wage, and covers his running costs. $159,000 a year divided by the total billable hours he has is $89.84 per hour. That is what Brett from New South Wales should roughly be charging per hour to have a somewhat successful business. Hey everyone, this is just a quick little interjection in the podcast to say thank you for checking in. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. If you made it this far into the podcast, I really hope you are enjoying it and someone's not holding you against your will. But I just want to say, if you are enjoying it, I would really appreciate all the support you can get. Share it with your friends that you think will actually like it. Share it with your mum. Force her to watch it and say, Mum, if you don't watch it, then you don't love me. Actually, no, don't do that. Just share it with people who are actually in the industry. That's probably a better idea. We'll get back into the podcast, but I just want to say thank you so much. Any little share, like, subscribe, all that YouTube-y, podcasty stuff, you know what to do. But just thank you, and we'll get back into the podcast now. Now, I know some numbers from Brett because he told me what he's actually doing this year. Now, I'm not going to say exactly what he's sold this year, but he's actually doing really well. So what Brett told me is that the year to date, again, I'm not going to tell you exact numbers, but his year to date, he's around $150,000, $160,000 for the year. Again, I don't know how many years Brett's been in business for. I don't know exactly what type of work he's doing, but he has got a very tight, efficient schedule, which is obviously really helping him out. So if he's done about $150,000 to $160,000 a year for this financial year, then he should get roughly $210,000 to $225,000 for this entire year. What that means is that per hour on site, Brett from New South Wales is actually charging about $122 per hour. Now, that's actually roughly what we charge per hour at Silverstone Gardening. Again, I told you at the beginning, we're charging about $127 for a once-off, a single hour on site. So that's a really interesting thing, and I hope that's really helpful for you. So let's make some changes to this then that will hopefully make this a little bit more applicable for some people. And what that will do is if we change the numbers in here, what you will find is that we will also change the target hourly rate down here. And some of you are listening to this going, oh my goodness, how are these gardening businesses getting $120 an hour? We're going to talk about that in a different podcast. That's a whole thing in and of itself because it definitely can be done. I mean, you can see it right here, but you got to start at the beginning, and let's just start with these things. So the first thing, your weeks worked per, I typed in the whole time, I had weeks worked per week at the top of my spreadsheet. Weeks worked per year is what it should say. Whoopsies. Weeks worked per week should be 1, not 48. Although if you are doing 48 weeks in a week, and you're magical, and give me your secrets, all right? All right. Gardening hours per week and weeks worked per year. Some of you want to have more weeks off. And so let's say you want to have 8 weeks off a year. Let's say you want, a couple around Christmas and a whole bunch of time off at winter. Let's say you want to do 8 weeks off, so you do 44 weeks in a year. Straight away, for those listening, the target number's gone from $89 an hour to $91 an hour because simply you've got less hours to cover those expenses. Right? Let's say you go back to 48 weeks a year, but you don't want to work that many hours. Okay, you only want to work 30 hours a week, including admin and non-billable hours. Driving, all sort of stuff. So let's say you're doing 5 hours a week, so 1 hour a day of non-billables and half an hour a day of admin. All right, so if you do 22.5 hours of gardening per week, your total work week is 30 hours a week. And what that means is you still have your expenses, your running costs, your fuel, your insurance, because we haven't changed those from what Brett's numbers were. Obviously, your fuel would go down a little bit. So let's just do that. Let's say it's going to be $6,000 a year in fuel if you're not working less hours. What you find is, for those watching, obviously the yearly cost for your garden is going to go down because you're not doing as much gardening work. But you'll also find that you still have a lot of running expenses. And so the hourly rate actually goes up. You need $106 an hour on average to work those sorts of hours and still make a 20% profit margin. Now, another question that people ask, they go, well, I've worked for some really big businesses in the industry and they don't charge these numbers. The reason is they're non-billables and the way they do business is very, very different. And I'm going to show you that now. So here's how these bigger businesses are making profits without needing to charge such high hourly rates. There are three reasons. The first is economies of scale. And so their expenses are way down because you might be a single person, or maybe you've got an offsider and you're driving around your car to every single job. And so one person in the car, well, all your equipment expenses are just paid off by one person. But if you work for a really big business and you have really big contracts, you might have 3, 4, 5 people in a truck going to all your jobs. So that truck might cost, say, $80,000, $100,000, but it's spread out across 5 people. Right, the ride on lawnmowers, it's the same thing, right? It's spread out across all these people doing all these hours. And so it actually breaks down that cost a lot less. You might be driving a $40,000 car on your own, right? So it's $40,000 for you per working gardener, whereas the big business with an $80,000 truck with 4 people in it, you get the idea, it's $20,000 for them. So economies of scale brings those expenses down. Same with things like fertilizing, all that sort of stuff. They're buying those things on bulk. They have that buying power. You guys understand it. So the expenses go down. So I'm going to just put these expenses at from $13,000 to $8,000. Fuel, again, we're talking per person. And so you got 4 people in the car. Let's say it's $3,000 in fuel costs, or leaving insurance as it is. But straight away, if we just take our economies of scale and run our running costs down, we can go, I've done $8 instead of 8,000. But we've taken our running costs down $10,000 in a year. And we've gone from $106 per hour to $96 an hour there straight away. So economies of scale runs it down. And the second thing that happens is these bigger businesses, because they're doing bigger jobs, there's very little travel time between those jobs. When you're running a residential business and you're driving 5 minutes between 10 jobs a day, you're doing 50 minutes of travel time just to do that. Then you might have 20 minutes of travel time to and from your house at the beginning and end of the day. So it's easy to rack up, hours and hours and hours of travel time. We talked about this before. But if you're a big business and you've got one job to do that day, and let's say it's 20 minutes from your warehouse, right? Well, you've only got 40 minutes of travel time for the day. So half the travel time. So if we take our non-billable hours from 5 hours a week, we'll make it 3 hours a week. Because let's say this is really tight efficiency. And then this is where it also gets crazy. Admin hours per week. If you're doing massive contracts, right, you only need to send, one invoice a fortnight for the same amount of work that a residential person might need to send 30, 40 invoices for, 30, 40 times chasing up, all that sort of stuff. So, we'll put 1 hour a week of admin for some of these big places. And then you come down to the wages. Because they're bigger businesses doing larger things, what they usually do is they hire one person who's really, really good, knows what they're doing, can oversee everything else, and then everybody else is laborers. So their average hourly rate is much more reduced. When you're running a residential business, and this is completely underrated how difficult a residential business really is. But if you're running a residential business, one of the things that you're doing is you're showing so much initiative, so much. There's a lot more complications. You got to talk to clients. You've got to identify problems on a small level, and also your client who looks over your job, they've only got 300, 200, 100 square meters to look over on small residential jobs. Whereas big commercial jobs, right? If you're doing work for a council, there might be hectares and hectares and hectares that I guess a council person might only look at once a quarter, right? So there's a lot of attention to detail that's needed residentially that isn't needed commercially. There's a lot of knowledge on how to talk to clients and how to identify problems that's not necessarily needed in every employee on a commercial level. You can get away with that by having one person good at that. And so these businesses might need to hire 1 or 2 people on a higher hourly rate, their average hourly rate is lower. So we'll put $30 an hour. I mean, that's too high for those people. Let's put $25 an hour down as their average hourly gardening rate. And I do know that, for example, some bigger businesses over here, they're paying $24 an hour. Actually, this is a casual rate, so I should put it up. $24 an hour. They're paying for a full-timer. So we'll put $28 an hour as their average. And what you see there is you take that hourly rate from all the way from $106 an hour, and it's gone down to $68 an hour. Look, I'm not going to keep going with these numbers because I'm really making these numbers up when it comes to the specific numbers we're putting into this spreadsheet. But you get the concepts. You can have a much larger business that does much bigger jobs, commercial jobs, with less non-billable hours because you're not doing so much travel time. You can pay people less because they don't need to identify and solve problems on each individual job. Their work is not being checked over as there's not much what's the word? Scrutin. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Anyways, people aren't as strict with the quality standards on a lot of large problems. It's not always true. Obviously, there's a lot of really high-end jobs where the hourly rate's going to be higher and the people needed are going to be more specialized. But you get the point I'm coming across. The economies of scale, reduced non-billable hours, and reduced gardener wages really bring those hourly rate requirements down for those large businesses, whereas small residential businesses too need to charge more. All right, so in conclusion, what we've looked at, we've gone through a lot of different things in this podcast. So let's summarize. The first thing we've looked at is online. People say we should be charging $40 to $60 an hour. They are wrong. Those numbers are usually aggregated from less qualified, or not less qualified, less experienced businesses. So the accuracy of the numbers is diluted significantly. The second thing we've looked at is what the average contractor charges based on a poll I did at the start of the year with 650 business votes. We found that there seemed to be two averages around the $80 an hour average and around the $100 an hour average. And so that worked out to be across the industry, though, because there were still quite a few people on the lower end of that region, about a $78 an hour average for the industry. However, when we looked into the numbers ourselves, we looked at Brett's from New South Wales, we looked at his numbers, and he, to run a successful business that covered the running costs he had, it covered the admin and gardener wages he would need to pay to replace himself and allowed himself to pay himself some profit, cover his GST. He needed to charge about $90 an hour, but he's been doing really well, and he's actually charging around $122 an hour. So his profit is really good, and he's running a healthy business compared to most. And so then we looked in finally, we changed a few little numbers, and we showed how these things can tweak over time. And you may find that yourself, you need to charge less. You maybe need to charge more depending on how many hours you do, what your economies of scale are, what type of work you're doing, all that sort of stuff. Look, this podcast's gone long, right? But I hope it's helpful. I don't think there's anything else on the internet quite as in-depth as this for Australian market. There's a lot of stuff in the American market that's helpful. If I've lost you at any point in this, I highly recommend that you watch this a couple of times, you download this spreadsheet and try and work it out for yourself. If you are still lost, which I doubt you will be because I think you are smarter than what you're saying, all right? You are not a dumb gardener. You can work this out. You don't need a university degree. But if you do need some extra help, then definitely contact an accountant, or you can contact a business coach like Darren. We talked about that before. So look, I hope this is helpful. Leave a comment below. If you made it all the way to the end, definitely subscribe, all right? Because obviously you like this content, and I'll see you in the next podcast.